You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So as Donald Trump's criminal trial in New York winds down and we await a verdict from the jury, ultimately, I want to talk about sentencing in the event of a conviction, of the prospect of jail versus probation, for example. So we're going to explore all of that, but just a reminder that Glenn and I will be doing daily breaking coverage of this trial, so if you want to follow along with what happens on a daily basis, please make sure to subscribe. Okay, so Glenn, let's say the jury returns a guilty verdict. Walk us through what happens next.
So, Brian, Donald Trump is facing 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. In theory, each count of conviction carries up to 4 years in prison, but importantly, there's no mandatory jail time. What does that mean? It means that Judge Merchan, even in the event the jury convicts him 34 times over, Judge Merchan could still give him probation. Or Judge Merchan could sentence him to a period of home detention, which I have always maintained is no kind of punishment at all. Heck, it's a vacation for some people if they get to stay home for a period of time, not have to work. But there's one thing in particular that Judge Merchan said during the course of the trial that informs my opinion that Judge Merchan will at least give Donald Trump some period of incarceration. And it was when Judge Merchan was deciding whether Donald Trump committed the crime, actually multiple crimes, of contempt of court for violating the gag order. Ultimately, after a hearing on the merits, Judge Merchan convicted Donald Trump of 10 separate contempt of court offenses. Each offense carries up to 30 days in jail. Added up, Donald Trump could have spent 300 days in jail for the 10 offenses he was found guilty of, and he was found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by Judge Merchan. Judge Merchan then said something that, one, made my heart sink a little as a former career prosecutor, and two, informs my opinion that Judge Merchan is likely to give Donald Trump a jail sentence. He said, I don't want to confine you. Now, this was while the trial was ongoing after he'd been found guilty of contempt of Congress. I don't want to confine you because you're a former president of the United States and you could very well be the future president of the United States. The reason that made my heart sink, Brian, is because that was Judge Merchan in a moment of weakness announcing that he would not apply the law equally to Donald Trump because of his status. That's kind of the opposite of what we want to see, in our criminal justice system. But that's what Judge Merchan said. Now, I acknowledge that it would have complicated matters pretty significantly if he put Donald Trump in jail during the course of the trial, and he opted not to do it. But by that statement, what I took away from it was you deserve to be put in jail. And I have a feeling that will inform, at least in part, what Judge Merchan decides to do by way of sentencing Donald Trump. He has almost sort of deferred a period of incarceration just for the contempt of court convictions. So I have a feeling Judge Merchan will understand that without punishment, without consequences, the entire endeavor has been for naught. That is, the indictment, the trial, the verdict. It has all been for naught if there aren't consequences, if there isn't punishment. And the only punishment that will really cause not only Donald Trump to sit up and take notice, but others who might follow in Donald Trump's footsteps, who might falsify business records for any number of reasons, including to gain advantage in an election. I think Judge Merchan will sentence him to prison. How long? This is pure speculation, Brian, but I have a feeling you're going to see a sentence of somewhere between a year and 18 months or a year and 2 years. Now, let's talk about what other options the judge has. He could impose a sentence of incarceration and suspend all or some of it. What does that look like? Well, he could impose 18 months confinement, suspend all but 1 year. What does that mean? It means Donald Trump would have to serve 6 months of the 18-month sentence. He would then be released and placed on probation for a period of time. And if he violated any of the conditions of probation as set by the judge, he would go back in and finish the balance of his sentence. In my hypothetical, it would be another year. That is a pretty common, we call it a split sentence. It's a pretty common way for a judge to impose some punishment, some incarceration, and then leave another period of incarceration hanging over the defendant's head to try to keep him on the straight and narrow once he is released and placed on probation. So all of this is kind of our thought experiment, right? We're thinking out loud what might happen, and But again, if I had to place a bet, I would probably bet 75 cents on the dollar that Donald Trump is going to see the inside of a prison at the time Judge Merchan sentences him.
Glenn, this may be a more cynical read of what you just said, but what I really took from what Judge Merchan said, and tell me if this is a fair assessment, when he said that I don't want to incarcerate you because you were the former president and you may very well be the next president, what I took out of that is that he's actually just less likely overall, that this was just less likely overall to incarcerate him, that this was just kind of a preview into his thought process, and that far from saying that and then having to compensate for it, that this was just kind of a window into how he viewed sentencing for Donald Trump just in general.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely an appropriate take, and I don't think my take is any better than yours. However, I feel like Judge Merchan found Donald Trump guilty of contempt for violating his, Judge Merchan's, gag order. I think it takes on a very different complexion when a jury of Donald Trump's peers unanimously finds that Donald Trump committed multiple felonies in violation of New York state law. Judge Merchan may still be of the belief that he would rather not be in a position to have to incarcerate a former and potential future president. But under those circumstances, which I see as slightly different from Donald Trump violating Judge Merchan's gag order, I think under those circumstances, he will feel compelled to, he will feel obligated to, and he'll believe it's the right thing to do because there has to be deterrent value to the entire exercise that we've just been through, that the American people have just been through. This trial, which has been in the making for a year now, I think Judge Merchan will feel it's important, indeed necessary, to impose some significant punishment, and that would include incarceration.
Right, I mean, basically, if he does opt for probation, isn't that basically him just offering tacit permission for Donald Trump to commit more crimes, which would be even worse than if he didn't get convicted in the first place, because now he knows that he isn't even bound by the courts and that he truly is above the law.
Yeah, it's funny. A conviction almost feels like a pardon, right? Like you're completely excusing or holding harmless.
Right, a conviction with probation.
Yeah, a conviction with probation actually feels almost akin to a pardon.
Yeah.
You're kind of excusing the person. You're letting the person go unpunished for the crimes they in fact committed. So, I don't see Judge Merchan going that way, not by everything I've seen from Judge Merchan, how he presided over this case, how he presided over the prosecution of the Trump Organization, the criminal cases of Allen Weisselberg. I don't see Judge Merchan going down the road of no punishment, which is, in essence, excusing the criminal conduct.
And how much of the fact that if he did decide to do this, to impose a sentence of incarceration on Donald Trump, how important is the fact that, there will inevitably be threats of violence from Donald Trump supporters? How much of an impact is that going to have on the sentencing by Judge Merchan?
It will have zero impact. I'm fairly confident in that assessment, Brian. I think Judge Merchan knows, as all judges know, as all career criminal practitioners in the criminal justice system know, that if you start to make decisions, whether they're prosecutorial decisions or judicial decisions, based on collateral consequences, in other words, how might others react to a particular sentence? If that enters into the calculation of how the criminal justice system should do business, we are lost. The criminal justice system has lost all legitimacy. Can you imagine judges or prosecutors saying, you know what, there's enough evidence to bring a charge, or there's enough evidence to sentence somebody for a period of incarceration for their crimes, but other people on the outside of this process might have strong feelings about that one way or another. I'm going to let that factor into my decision, and I'm going to make a different decision. That's a recipe for the end of the legitimacy of the criminal justice system, and I do not believe Judge Merchan will factor that in.
And let's finish off with this. Let's say the jury does hand down their guilty verdict. How much time in between that verdict being handed down and sentencing by Judge Merchan?
So I spoke with some friends who are criminal litigators in New York, and they say it's very short-fused. Most jurisdictions, it will be 30 days, 60 days, sometimes 90 days, and that includes in the federal jurisdiction. In New York, I am told by some of the practitioners up there that the norm is for sentencing to be held about a week after the verdict is handed down. Maybe they stick with the norm in this case, even though there's nothing normal or usual about it. It wouldn't surprise me if they sort of departed from the norm and maybe made it a couple or a few weeks. But if they stick to the norm, and I hope they do, we could see sentencing within about a week of the jury returning its verdict.
All right, well, we'll obviously stay on top of this trial as it continues to play itself out. For those watching right now, if you're not yet subscribed and you want to follow along with the trial, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.